Hello HEMA friends and welcome to this new episode of our Longsword Techniques Compendium. Today we are going to give a look to the feint in many different contexts of application.
But before I start listing techniques and actions, you need to understand a crucial concept.
A crucial point that you have to keep in mind about the feint is that you have to execute an action which looks like an attack. The opponent has to feel threatened by this kind of action.
For example, here I told Marco that I was going to attack him at a certain point, and so I asked him to parry when he felt the need. As you can see, the feint that works doesn't really look like an attack. That's because the form of the feint is relevant only to a degree. What matters is looking threatening and intentioned to hit during its execution. It's all about body language.
Making an action which feels like an attack doesn't necessarily mean that you have to land an attack cut in half, or that you have to strike an attack and then try to stop it at a certain point, because this slows the action. You have to land instead an action which the opponent feels threatening, and to understand what the opponent feels threatening, you have to scout the opponent before landing the feint. Just landing the feint without thinking about it as the first action may be extremely dangerous. So first of all, track the opponent, do certain movements, try to do movements which are easy to connect to other attacks, and then if you see that the opponent is reacting in the proper way, so defending with a parry, then you can land your feint next.
So the first feint of our list is the simple feint, the one which works the most given the right conditions to apply it. This feint is landed against an opponent which is inviting our attack, which means his weapon is not pointed toward us. If you scouted the opponent and you know he tends to parry rather than counterattack, you can land your feint. Feint an attack following the advice I just gave you, stimulate a parry and then land an attack on another opening. Try to avoid getting contact with the opponent's blade at any cost, as this may stimulate a sudden riposte. The second feint is a feint in the bind. If the first feint had to be seen, this one needs to be felt. The conditions to land this feint are pretty simple. You need to be in a bind with the opponent which is offering you the blade in longa, languard, or whatever you want to call it. You can feint a thrust with opposition or cut toward the arms or head of the opponent with some smart mechanics. What actually matters is that the opponent has to feel that parrying is the only way to go. Once you land this action, you can instantly cut or thrust toward the opponent after disengaging your weapon. This feint in Longsword is a little bit more risky, as people tend to riposte more often to feints in the bind rather than against simple feints that we have just seen. This is because of the bind itself, which makes the opponent feel more confident about the fact their parry worked. To mitigate the risk of ripostes, trying to move sideways while landing the attack after the feint, away from the opponent's sword. A way to make the feint in the bind more viable is to strike the arms of the opponent instead of searching for the deeper target. A feint followed by a fast cut to the forearm is extremely good in this kind of conditions. Remember to use a footwork which fits the case to land this kind of action. Don't land a huge passing step to search for the arm. Instead, go for a small step or lunge and then retreat back as fast as possible. Another risky but extremely effective way to land a feint against an opponent with the weapon online is to feint an attack toward the hands. If after enough scouting you find out that your opponent retreats the hands while feeling them threatened, you can use this at your advantage by feinting for the hands and then attacking the head or torso with a cut or thrust. Notice that if the opponent keeps the tip online while retreating the arms instead of moving back to another guard which invites you, this option becomes extremely risky and far from advisable. Another solution to feint against an opponent with the weapon online is to create the invitation meant to land a simple feint by yourself. To do this, you can beat aside the opponent weapon just enough so that there is a space to feint an attack into it. From here we are in the same conditions of the simple feint. On the opponent parry, avoid making contact with the blade and then land an attack on another line. A feint can also be landed during an exchange. For example, after landing an attack against an opponent which tends to parry without landing any riposte, you can feint the second action and then land the third. This will increase the chance to land your third strike in a dramatic way, making it almost impossible to parry. The problem related to this kind of action is that it requires a very specific kind of opponent, not so easy to find out in our modern fencing environment. Now, the previous action can be easily converted into a double feint. If you are very good at feinting and, again, the opponent relies a lot on the parry as a defensive tool, you can feint the first attack, then feint the second, and then land the real attack on the initial line. Against an opponent which loves to parry and has fast reaction times or goes backward while parrying in a proper way to gain time, this solution may be ideal. Remember that all the feints that you have just seen must be landed after proper scouting, or broadly speaking, after understanding that the opponent has twitchy parry reactions, because the feint is, tactically speaking, the counter to the parry.
Very good, people, we are at the end of this video. I hope you will find it useful in some ways. Thanks for watching as always. Remember to check my Patreon page, link in the description, if you want to support me. And if you want to buy this beautiful Hello HEMA Friends t-shirt, just check my shop here on YouTube and you will find also the products under this video. Again, thanks for watching and see you next time.